It must be political.
It may be a signal that the U.S., at least in this point in time, is not so welcoming to foreign investment, particularly in sectors deemed strategically important.
I think Donald Trump is going to play like the role of the savers to those working there in the U.S. Steel.
What Trump is going to do probably in this kind of negotiating position is Nippon Steel, up the offer.
The Chat Lounge. Chat Lounge.
Chat Lounge.
The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Welcome to the Chat Lounge. I'm Tuyu, and joining me to discuss the U.S. government blocking Nippon Steel's acquisition of U.S. Steel are William Lee, the Chief Economist at the U.S.-based Milken Institute, Dr. Edward Lehman, founder and managing director of China-based law firm Lehman, Lee & Shi, and Dr. Zhou Mi, deputy director of the Institute of American and Oceania Study, Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. It's great to have you all back at the chat, gentlemen. So Japan's largest steelmaker and the United States' third largest steelmaker have filed lawsuits against the U.S. government for blocking their $15 billion acquisition deal. So first question to you all, very briefly, what was your first response to the U.S. government's decision to block the deal between the two steelmakers? Shall we begin with William there?
Sure. I was actually very surprised to hear that there was such huge opposition against the sale of U.S. Steel to Nippon Steel. I understand the rationale of such an iconic name with such a huge history in the United States that plays a central role in steelmaking. But the notion that it's a national security threat seemed a bit far-fetched. And so really it came down to, my impression was, it must be political. And of course it was, because Joe Biden is a union guy at U.S. Steel. It's a highly unionized shop, and they wanted to sell to another highly unionized shop like Cleveland-Cliffs rather than some foreign firm which may not respect the rights of union workers. And the one thing that Joe Biden wanted to maintain as his legacy was he's a union guy to the end. He's going to protect the union worker, not so much all American workers, but the American union workers. And I think that is the key defining characteristic of why this deal was being scuttled by President Biden.
What about Ed?
You know, I grew up around the steel industry, so it was not far from where I lived, and passed by it to go to university and pass through where the steel industry was. I mean, U.S. Steel was founded in 1901. Like you said, it's come and seen its heyday since then. I mean, I think it has a market cap of about $5 billion. But this doesn't come as any surprise, and I don't disagree with what William was saying, which is Biden is a union guy. He wasn't, well, Mrs. Harris was not necessarily endorsed by the union. I can't remember if she was or not by the Steelworkers Union. There were some that remained agnostic, and I believe that they did in this go-round. But typically the Democratic Party is pro-union, and that could have played into it. It doesn't jump off the page, to me at least, that this is essential for defense equipment and other essential sectors, which is what they're saying it's all about. But it may be a signal that the U.S., at least in this point in time, is not so welcoming to foreign investment, particularly in sectors deemed strategically important. I mean, the U.S. steel industry and the lobbyists for it are among the strongest in the United States. And so it doesn't come as a huge surprise that they're putting the kibosh on it under CFIUS. But, you know, America is supposed to stand for free trade and open investment policies and recognizing the benefits of foreign investment and expertise and fostering economic growth and innovation. I mean, that's what capitalism is supposed to be all about. And this seems like an anathema, certainly, to that. But there's always a tension between these principles and a desire to protect domestic industries and national security. So certainly this tension has become more pronounced in recent years with the growing concerns about China's economic military rise and the potential for impact on U.S. interests. So this is another kind of background player in all of this. I know it's Japan, but I'm saying that, you know, this spills out into what the Biden administration, which is coming to a quick close, but it's kind of walked a fine line between promoting open investment and safeguarding national security. The whole administration was a little bit muddled, so it's hard to really draw complete lines with it. But as of Mr. Trump taking office on January 20th, which is coming up very fast, we'll see, because he has the ability to change course if he wanted to.
Right. We'll dive deeper into those possibilities later on. But as someone who grew up around steel, as you said, personally speaking, do you support the acquisition?
I do, actually. I mean, I think
Right.
this is me personally. It's very scary. I mean, it's ironic. I mean, U.S. Steel, the home, or certainly a large part of it, was in Gary, Indiana. I grew up in Chicago. Gary is the home of Michael Jackson, just as non sequitur and all. But when you go through there with the smokestacks and all this stuff that are coming from the steel industry, at least when I was a kid, it seemed like hell on earth with regards. U.S. Steel was created as a response to an 1896 fallout with the Pullman car industry. So it was an unplanned city, and it just grew up around the corporation. But I mean, Gary has seen a huge decline. But to be honest with you, yeah, the situation, the infrastructure for the steel industry in the United States, which used to be, like I said, a titan, is just a ghost of its former self. After the Second World War, I mean, I think 50% or 60% of all steel production and all the stuff was coming from the United States, because they were the only ones not devastated by the Second World War, with the infrastructure. They haven't updated stuff, and I'm being a little bit fast and loose with that, since that time. I think that other markets like China, like South Korea, like Japan, have, because they were forced to upgrade their industries, they did it, and America became fat and lazy. So I think it would be a good thing for America, frankly.
Okay. Then to Dr. Zhou here in Beijing, from the perspective of China, it's like a third country, but some people would just want to throw China in this case, but we'll talk about that later. So how unusual is it? Doesn't the reason, national security sound like something Washington would use when a deal involves a buyer from a country it deems hostile or an enemy rather than an ally? Dr. Zhou.
Yeah, according to my understanding, that the United States has very limited power, I mean, for the administrations of the White House. So they are always use the national security as one of the excuses to trying to enforce their targets. And this is, the CFIUS is one of these very good examples. They are trying to use the national security on everything, especially on the merging and acquisition. In my understanding, I don't think that is so surprising to me, because I have noticed that even for such a long time, and the Nippon Steel is trying to buy the U.S. steel for quite a while, but they are still under the process. So in my understanding, that U.S. is putting a lot of more emphasis in the steel and iron industry recently after Donald Trump first term. So they has put a lot of tariffs on the import of steel and iron products from so many other countries, want to protect these local industries. So in this regard, they will try to do more to support the local development. And in the Biden administration, he also produced so many opportunities, like for the infrastructure update or other kind of more input. So it is no wondering whether such kind of important sectors are attracting so many possible or potential investors, like from Japan, they want to buy it. But from the United States aspect, I think it's not that easy to just trying to welcome another investors to control everything. They have put so many emphasis. So I don't think that's so surprising to me.
Right. And you've already touched upon the deal. Dr. Zhou, can you help us understand further the reason why Nippon Steel is so obsessed on a loss-making U.S. steel? It is, the third largest U.S. steel maker, but it's in deficit, right? Why Nippon Steel double the bid offered by, another American steel company, which is a big bonus, right?
Yeah, actually, for the steel industry, it is very normal for them to expand their skill and capacities. Like we can find that even in the past maybe several decades, we can find that the merging and acquisitions are happening everywhere, from Japan to China to South Korea and to the United States. They are trying to merge to become a bigger one, to have a benefit from the economy of the scale, and trying to have a better competitiveness in the producing of those products, and trying to have a better position in deciding the prices of the market. Well, it is also important for us to discuss about the relation between the steel industries and also the real estate and also some of the car makings. So actually, it is very usual for them to do that in the past. But if they are becoming already very few apples in the basket, it's becoming even more difficult for them to do more. So the governments are very strong in the position to control the trust and try to control the monopoly. I don't think it's a bad thing, but can we just try to look at it with from different perspectives? That will be more complicated, as both Williams and Ed has mentioned about the working unions. They really are benefited by the larger scale of this company and benefited by more profits. But if they are suffering, if there will be more bankruptcy, I don't think that will benefit them. But we have to deal with the situation in such a very complicated scenarios and the political tensions and also the geopolitical tensions. It's really more complicated right now.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
And William, I'm wondering whether Nippon Steel's eagerness triggered U.S. suspicions over, the motives of the acquisition to any extent.
I'm not that conspiratorial. I love
right.
conspiracy theories, but I don't think that really fits there. It's really quite simple why it is that Nippon Steel wants U.S. Steel. It's the Japanese business model, right?
Okay.
Toyota has been making cars in the United States for decades. Why? Because the principle is you want to produce in the market that you have your largest sales. If you have a huge domestic market somewhere, you want to have a production presence there to minimize transport costs and to be able to really employ the people who will be your customers. That was what Henry Ford wanted to do as well. When Henry Ford hired people, right, he paid them an extraordinarily high salary. Why? So they could buy the Ford, right? So in that sense, Nippon Steel saw the U.S. Market as a huge opportunity for them to really expand their sales of steel, especially to car production and all the necessities that use steel in the United States. So it really is as simple as that. The reason why, in some ways, this has become a whole issue is, as the head of Nippon Steel said, I love the idea of buying U.S. steel. I've always wanted it, but it's shame on me that I chose the election year to make the bid.
Right.
and that was really his undoing, because U.S. Steel is so iconic with this rich history and its central role in producing flat roll steel that it has become a political issue, especially in the unionized versus non-unionized world. Remember, one of the most profitable steel companies in the United States, called Nucor, is a specialty steel manufacturer that uses electroplating instead of the big blast furnaces. And that kind of electric arc furnace technology is in some sense what Nippon Steel wants to offer to U.S. Steel to raise its technological base so that it can be competitive with a shop like Nucor, which is a U.S. company, let alone competitors in South Korea and China. And I think the reason why, as I said, why President Biden is so against it is because it wasn't clear that the union jobs be preserved. When all workers become more productive, they get higher salaries. And one way of getting even higher salaries is to bring in non-union workers, the way Nucor has been so successful in doing. Whereas Nippon Steel's competitor is Cleveland-Cliffs, and that is a well-known union shop and a huge manufacturer of cold rolled steel, which uses the similar technology as U.S. Steel. So for the United States, it's really even a further legal problem of, are you creating a large monopoly by allowing Cleveland-Cliffs to merge with U.S. Steel rather than a foreign competitor that preserves the competition in the United States of having Nucor, Cleveland-Cliffs, and the reformulated U.S. Steel as three parties that are competing in the U.S. market? That would really, in some sense, be good for competition. So the economics of the deal don't make sense in the sense of, you're creating a monopoly, more of a monopoly situation by allowing Cleveland-Cliffs to buy U.S. Steel. Not only do you have a monopoly, but also you have monopsony in terms of union shops, employing unionized workers. So you have the worst of both worlds in the merger that President Biden is proposing, which is why most economists, at least from my perspective, would say this is really a political decision, not economic.
Right. You talked a lot about the pros and cons of the deal for the steelmakers, but what about the U.S. government? It must have some special excuses apart from the national security grounds, right?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I'm glad you asked that, because We talked earlier about how the decision was made by CFIUS. CFIUS was inconclusive. In fact, Janet Yellen said we could not come to a conclusion that there were national security interests. Now, remember, CFIUS consists of Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, being at the chair, head of this Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. But it's composed of the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, all the government officials, including Inland Security and Homeland Security and that kind of stuff. So these are all government officials that were part of the administration, and they couldn't conclude there was national security concerns.
Right.
So it became a presidential decision, not a CFIUS decision, to junk the merger with Nippon Steel. So it's not CFIUS, but rather President Biden solely responsible for the decision.
And to add, like William just mentioned, a lot of government officials or departments are opposed to this deal. Obviously, there are some agreeing with it, but they could not reach this consensus. That's also why the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS, couldn't come to a conclusion. Love this decision to President Biden. Then, Ed, how will their respective opinions affect this legal process?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're at the tip of the spear with this whole thing because, and William brought it up, and you've highlighted it as well. So we've got CFIUS, then it goes to President Biden. Okay, so it's getting to be from a group to one guy. Okay, now then let's just say it gets past all that. You still have what William had brought up, which was the antitrust issues. So there could be litigation, that would ensue under the antitrust laws. Well, not if Nippon purchased it, but if its U.S. competitor did. Or there could be something against the Nippon would protest and say, they would bring it to the Federal Trade Commission and say, let's break this up, or, whatever the regulating body would be. So it could be a litigation, could be an administrative action. But, just to go back to why Nippon Steel wants to buy this, and William touched on it, but I just it deserves a little bit more look at.
Sure.
So it reduces the reliance on exports, like he was saying earlier, and it increases its market share. But U.S. Steel possesses valuable assets, including manufacturing facility, distribution networks, and intellectual property that could be integrated into Nippon Steel's operations. Even though this is a losing operation, they actually get the benefit of that. I also think that, I'm old enough to remember, maybe you guys aren't, but certainly the past is prologue with regards to our Japanese folks. I mean, so it used to be the big three, and that was or the big four, I guess, the protected car companies at one point in time, depending on how one looks at it. And then they came in, the Japanese automotive companies, and they came into places where there was non-union shops. So they stayed away from Detroit and other places that were the traditional epicenter of that. And they were able to kind of change the whole market. They went to Alabama, they went to Tennessee, to some other places. So that I think that they could use this as a jumping off point. And inevitably, there's going to be tariffs and barriers that are going to be put on, maybe under the Trump administration, as to imported steel, which is problematic. And we've certainly seen that with China and all of the actions that were brought on anti-dumping with China. So I anticipate that would happen in the next go-round. So all this would obviously lend for them to streamline their processes for Nippon Steel and allow them, a broader strategy to increase their global footprint and competitiveness, which is exactly what William was saying. That was done in the car industry, certainly, before, and that's probably what they're looking to do now. I do think that it's not just going to be CFIUS. It's not going to be just the executive order, but it's also going to be the other administrative agencies that can chime in that might have a problem with this. But all this doesn't really bode well as America being a capitalist country. I mean, it is when it wants to be, and it isn't when it doesn't want to be. So that's what becomes problematic. And I think we'll see that perhaps in the next administration with high tariffs. And maybe this is anticipating, Nippon is trying to anticipate what might happen there. So we'll see.
A major concern of this deal, which the Biden administration says it may threaten the national security, is that they believe it could potentially lead to a decline in American steel production. So, William, under what circumstances could that happen, and how likely would it be?
That's the nightmare scenario that politicians like to bring up when they want votes and they want to show how strong they are in protecting American jobs.
Right.
But that nightmare scenario, in some ways, can't happen because Nippon Steel's whole agenda for buying U.S. steel is to infuse technology, infuse capital, more than American investors are willing to do right now, and expand U.S. jobs and expand high-paying jobs in the United States. So in terms of allowing U.S. steel and steel manufacturing capacity in the United States to decline, sort of a backdoor way of sabotaging the steel industry, that would certainly not be in the interest of Nippon Steel to do. And remember, as we all keep saying, Japan is an ally, one of America's closest allies. And there's no way, for example, that Toyota came in and to try to explicitly knock Ford and General Motors out of existence. Now, they did so in part because their products were so much better. And so we might find that Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel combination might threaten Nucor and Cleveland-Cliffs because of their productivity and force those other two companies to become even more productive than they are. So that kind of competition in some ways is good competition. And as I said, the nightmare scenario is that Japan subsidizes Nippon Steel in a way to lower prices and lower the cost of manufacturing in the United States so much, it knocks Nucor and Cleveland-Cliffs out of existence, creates a big monopoly, and suddenly Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel raises prices like crazy, right? That's the nightmare scenario. It's unlikely that an ally would do that in the United States because then we say, all right, fine, we pull out all the U.S. troops from Japan and leave you guys alone.
Right.
So it's a very unlikely situation.
Right. Like you said, it's quite unlikely. And obviously, the Japanese side, they also made such promises, right? They also gave the U.S. government veto power over any reduction of U.S. Steel's production capacity, not moving jobs or production overseas. But it seems it still could barely persuade the Biden administration. So, Dr. Zhou, from your perspective, do you have any suggestion for them, or what else do you think the Japanese side could do to persuade Biden?
I don't think that they have to persuade Biden on this decision because we know that for the CFIUS decisions, they have several processes after the first review, second reviews, and the CFIUS will also exchange some of its opinions and concerns about the national security to the possible or potential buyers. So they have several rounds of negotiations and trying to raise their own plans on, reducing the possible impact of the national securities. And the final decisions are not so often to have to be made by the president. If it has to be made by the president, it's just about maybe one in more than several hundred or 1,000 cases. So it's very rare for the president to make decisions on vetoes for the purchase and acquisitions. Well, they can still do more in the coming days and in the different forms, like they can use a different, the range of purchase and also acquire several factories at the first round, or trying to put some more elements for the technology input in the U.S. Steel and trying to have a better cooperation with them. I don't think that it is just the stop for Biden to stop the acquisitions perpetually. They do have a lot of more opportunities in the coming days. So for the Nippon Steel, I don't think that they will also trying to do the same in the coming days, because when they are trying to make an offer, they have a lot of consideration about the nowadays conditions, about the shares, the profits of doing that. And then when they have to try to make another decision, they have to change the consideration about the conditions, like for the EVs, whether Donald Trump is still trying to very curious about the EVs and whether the energy uses will be different. So they will try to make another offer in the coming days, and they can still do that if they still think that is profitable.
Indeed, the Japanese side is making every effort and trying every method, if you will. This has been the Chat Lounge. When we come back, find out the likelihood of the two steelmakers winning their lawsuits against the U.S. government. Stay with us.
Sideline Story brings you all things sports related. The hottest topics, latest events, juiciest stories, all with a very personal take. Subscribe to Sideline Story Podcast for heated sports discussions covering events that are happening in China and around the world.
Welcome back to the Chat Lounge. We continue our chat on the fate of Nippon Steel's acquisition of U.S. Steel. We also see Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba warning of potential repercussions for bilateral business ties. I think that's another way they're trying. So, Dr. Zhou, what are the possible consequences the Japanese leader is hinting at?
Yeah, he is hinting that he thinks that the decision made by Biden administration is not so good. But I don't think that is very impactful, especially when he already knew that Biden will not continue in the White House for the coming years. So he posted that gesture is also because that White House is changing its host. So actually, I don't think it's a kind of very a threat to the U.S. because they cannot do that.
The Japanese Prime Minister also urged a detailed explanation of the president's reasoning for barring the deal. So, William, will he get a satisfactory answer?
Well, in some ways, President Trump would give him a completely different answer, and President Trump will have a different composition of CFIUS board. So I think all he has to do is just sit tight and wait 2 weeks, and the situation would change entirely.
Really?
I think a lot of Prime Minister Ishibara was posturing is for the domestic audience. His government is very shaky right now, and he's got to show Japanese businesses that he's really a tough leader. And so much of this saber rattling, in my mind, is for the Japanese audience and Japanese consumption.
So you're saying the Japanese side or Japan would not actually take any concrete moves in light of this, like reducing their investment in the U.S. or?
Quite the contrary. From every source I have in Asia and Japan in particular, Japanese view the United States as a great investment place because the U.S. is still the center of innovation in the world. It's a place that attracts enormous amounts of foreign capital, including and especially from Asia. And if their alternative is investing in Japan, then it's pretty clear that's not a viable alternative. So the U.S. market, as far as foreign capital is concerned, is still the most attractive in the world. And Japanese investors know that.
Obviously, the U.S. Steel is also doing its best, as we can see. Ed, the New York Times carried an opinion piece by U.S. Steel CEO David Burritt, who points fingers at China and says China wants the deal to fail. Don't let that happen. So what is he actually doing there? What kind of strategy is he trying to apply there? Scaring the U.S. government or politicians into endorsing the acquisition?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, David Burritt's strategy on trying to invoke China in this context appears to be an attempt to sort of frame in a broader geopolitical context and appeal to a sort of nationalistic sentiments, I would imagine. So by portraying China as the main beneficiary of this deal's failure, I would imagine Mr. Burritt suggests that it aims to rally support for the U.S. government and to reconsider its decision. So he argues that a stronger U.S. Steel, bolstered by Nippon Steel's investment in technology, which we talked about earlier, I mean, what they would bring to the table, would be better equipped to compete with Chinese steel producers who've been accused of unfair trade practices such as dumping. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Anti-dumping was kind of a sport in, I guess, the Trump administration pretty much. So selling goods below cost to gain a market share, and like William talked about, then jacking it up once you've got it, once you have the entire market to yourself. So I believe that's what he was trying to do. Mr. Trump, I guess, has different viewpoints on writing or things in the New York Times. I think it was Mark Twain that said, if you read the New York Times, or if you don't read the New York Times, you're uninformed. If you read it, you're misinformed. So I don't think he said New York Times, but just the media in general. So it's hard to say what the strategy was there. Certainly, they've put together a team of public relations folks to try to push this through. I think that there's a possibility this might happen. I think that Trump is actually, without getting too far afield, but he's going to be a bit of a wild card with some of these CFIUS decisions or some of these anti-competitive decisions. That's what it seems to be. It's hard to say, and I can't read the tea leaves, but it hasn't been completely consistent. Mr. Biden, like I said, his days are numbered. It's going to be January 20th, and he's out. I think that there will be a bunch of executive orders. I have no idea whether this is going to be one of them on day one with Mr. Trump, but they certainly have been very organized as opposed to 2016 taking over, and so that might be part of it. I also think that certainly
you think it could
Mr.
be
Trump
effective, this kind of strategy?
Sorry? Yeah, no, I do. It's worth a go, and
Right.
I don't see it as a non-starter. Yeah.
Okay, what about the other two guests? Dr. Zhou, maybe you have a different opinion there?
I think it's a kind of just trying to blame everything on China and trying to I agree with Ed that it's creating our alleged enemy that maybe it's a threat to the United States and trying to change their opinions. I don't think that is very effective because leaders are already making some of these decisions, and I think Biden is trying to also to give some of this even more difficult situation for Donald Trump to deal with, and it is definitely one of these ideas. But the ally, I don't think it's also a very reliable, relation right now. When we're talking about like United States and Canada as their alliance, I don't think that they are really trying to do good to their allies, even for some of their very close friends. So actually, when we're talking about that things from the angles of the political, I don't think it's just like trying to make a benefit or to think about what the laborers, what the workers are really get from this purchase or not get from the value of the purchase, but they really want to post a very strong gesture and trying to show that we are powerful, we are trying to decide everything. I don't think it's a kind of idea that the media is trying to do to change them, but they really want to be also get the people their own position and trying to be better position in other related environmental topics.
Now that Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel have brought the Biden administration to court saying the decision violates the Constitution, so Ed, what are the chances of the two companies winning their lawsuits then?
Well, I mean, I think they got a shot at it. I mean, firstly, they would argue that the president has exceeded its authority under the Exxon Florio Amendment by blocking the deal based on a broad interpretation of, quote, national security. That's kind of what we've been talking about.
That's
and
understood.
It goes beyond the scope of the law. So they're saying, and they could contend that the acquisition does not pose a genuine threat to national security. They can point towards the automotive industry. Like I said, certainly when I was growing up in Detroit, everything was anti-Japanese, like you can't believe, because they were trying to enter into the automotive market. And now we look decades on, and it has not been the problem that it's been. But steel's a different thing, and it's part of the industrial military complex of which President Eisenhower in his last speech said, "Be careful of those guys." There's a former general, and a president saying it. But they could contend that the acquisition does not pose a genuine threat to national security, and that the decision is motivated by other factors, protecting domestic jobs or appeasing political interests. Again, I think the biggest, and I know this sounds crazy, but the biggest problem in this thing is actually the union, in my mind. Having, again, grown up around unions, having been a member of a union, not the Steelworkers Union, but when I was a young person, I think that they need to sort of break away from that. That's a traditional thought process that resonates with a lot of Americans. And I'm not sure that it's the most efficient. So they could also argue the decision violates the due process rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, and they could claim that they're not given a fair opportunity to present their case to CFIUS, and that the decision was made without adequate evidence or justification. Challenging CFIUS, however, is in the court is notoriously difficult, as we've seen in the past. I've been tangentially involved with these kinds of cases. So the courts generally defer to the government's judgment on national security matters. It's sort of a black box, and some of this stuff is seen in camera, so it can't be publicly available in the courtroom to the trier of fact or to the jury, for an example. So it recognizes the executive's branch expertise and authority in this area. And this is part of the problem, and this is the reason why Donald Trump had resonated with a lot of Americans, black, white, and everything else, is that there's a group of people that are not elected officials that are making these kind of decisions. I know this is the executive office and Mr. Biden was certainly elected. But the difference is rooted in the separation of powers and the recognition that the president and his advisors have access to classified information and intelligence, but is not available to the court. So they got a bit of an uphill battle in the court system, but it's not insurmountable, certainly. And I do think that something will happen with an executive order, probably from Mr. Trump, one way or another, whether he'll support it or not. I don't think that the saber rattling, or whatever you want to call it, on behalf of the Japanese government is necessarily going to be the big influence here. I think it's going to be, internal with regards to the United States.
Then what are the chances, like 50-50 or?
Oh, I think they're good. Yeah, I think better than 50-50 in my opinion. But I mean, you never know with an outcome of a court case because, and it's a long process. You absolutely never know. The other thing to take in mind is that these judges are appointed by different presidents, by Mr. Bush, by old Mr. Bush, by young Bush, by Mr. Obama, and so it depends. These are all political agendas. Where sometimes, I'm not saying it's always, but sometimes the judge makes a decision in a litigation case and then works backward to justify that decision. It happens not only in the United States, but other places as well. So it's hard to really say. It's a bit of a gamble, and trying to tell clients, which I have to do quite often, what's the outcome of a case. It's very hard to say. Even if you have what seems like a slam dunk winner, it could be a loser because of the person that's hearing that particular case. So it all remains to be seen.
All right. How long do we have to wait before we can get a final ruling then?
Well,
your estimation.
It'll take time. I mean, the U.S. is very different from China. They've got a lot of discovery. It should be, even if they expedite this, it would be more than a year, certainly. And then they've got possible appeals to the appeals court, then even going to the Supreme Court if necessary. So that, it's not a short period of time, not a short window, even though I know that that's what they want, but law and economy and economic issues don't generally gel together very well. But I do believe that they're going to come up with some sort of solution that's patchwork together, and I would hope that they would be able to avoid the litigation. All litigation that goes to the actual court is a dog. It's not a good situation, and I think no one's happy with that. If they can come up with some sort of mediated settlement, that would be the best way.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Obviously, it'll extend into, Donald Trump's reign, right? William, it seems you think that the scenario could change when Donald Trump comes after he comes into office. But
absolutely.
Right. If my memory serves me correctly, I remember Trump once voiced very strong opposition to the deal, right?
Right. The deal as it was talked about earlier, and the deal as maybe it is now. But the one thing that Ed said that was very important is that it's never a static situation. Deals change, terms of the deals change, and especially when you have a new administration in place. And I think right now President Trump is chomping at the bits to address this and just waiting for the contestants to give him the best offer possible. Remember, the art of the deal, right, is that you make your opponent, the other side, offer the best deal they can because you come out with the best deal against them that you can. That is, I'm not going to help you unless you really help me. And so come and give me a better deal. Remember, the Make America Great agenda is to increase the number of high-paying American jobs, full stop, right? So what Trump is going to do probably in this kind of negotiating position is up the offer, right? Nippon Steel, up the offer. Infuse more capital into the United States to create more jobs, not just in steel production, steel distribution, and other companies to come with Nippon Steel to use U.S. Steel to create things in the United States, to produce in the United States. So I think the possibilities for a negotiated solution, as Ed said, to keep it out of the courts is going to be a very, very ripe set of opportunities that I think a negotiator like Donald Trump is chomping at the bits to get at. And the one thing he also hates is that the United States for the last 4 years, and in fact for the last decade, has been subject to the tyranny of the unelected apparatchiks, right? The unelected government official that's there, that's a technocrat doing these technocratic rulings, that subject the United States to a lot of regulatory and other kind of distortions. Donald Trump came in with the agenda of getting rid of all that, right? And getting back to simple deal making and letting markets work. So in that sense, I think we'll see quite a bit of dynamic change occur to the nature of the deal that Nippon Steel is offering. They'll probably sweeten it to the point where the Trump administration will feel and be able to sell to the American people. This is not Japan taking over U.S. Steel. This is Japan infusing capital and technology into creating more jobs. Look at what he did with SoftBank, right? And Masayoshi Son. I mean, he just said, hey, invest a couple more billion in here.
Right.
And they all shook hands and smiled, right? So I think that's what we should look forward to, is that type of strategy of negotiating that Donald Trump will be bringing.
Right. It seems our two American guests here are cautiously optimistic about the acquisition being able to be clinched as it's expected. But what if the deal fails? Dr. Zhou, from your perspective, how will they fail the deal affect the union workers or the U.S. government itself and the relations between the U.S. and arguably its most important ally in Asia?
Yeah, actually, I agree with William that when we're talking about the new administration, there will be always a lot of changes. And also, besides what William has mentioned, I think that Donald Trump is going to play like the role of the savers to those workers who are working there in the U.S. Steel. So he is trying to do that. He will get more votes from the common people. Well, in my understanding, as I have said, that when we're talking about the deal, I don't think that it is a static one. So they are going to modify that. They are going to improve that, or they are trying to change certain kind of details of the deals. Like what I have to say, when we're in the United States, when you are put in the suit, you have to spend a lot of money according to the lengthy the procedures of 1 year or even longer. You have to use a lot of money. How about just a change to another deal? I don't think that is definitely the same with the same amount of money or the same scope of obligations and also some of the privileges. But they can change some of these things and trying to also to group more companies like Toyota or other companies to do the similar things to reach similar goals. Well, in my understanding that there are some demands from the U.S. side, from Japan side, and no matter whether this deal can be fulfilled according to its original form, it can also reach certain kind of targets, like to create its capacities of producing the crude steel in the United States, or trying to just outsource some of this crude steel manufacturing to Mexico, or trying to have better supply chains there in the United States. So based on these scenarios, I would think that these deals can be even stronger in the coming years if Donald Trump is reducing the management or some of the manipulation of the market. Maybe it will be better with the deregulations environment in the coming years.
But even if this deal goes through successfully in the future, it still undergoes a lot of trouble, right? Like we've seen a lot of drama or some U-turns there will be. So would it have any implications to those who want to invest in the states, especially its allies, other allies in Europe or in Oceania? Dr. Zhou, what's your take there?
You mean from other allies to invest in the United States, right?
Right. Would this case make them, hesitant to any extent?
Yeah, I think it's repeatedly several times in the past, like from France, from French companies to invest there, even from other countries. So it's like reappeared once and once more. But I think the most important thing is about the real impact or benefits by investing in the U.S. Like both guests has mentioned, that the U.S. is very competitive in the past and in right now and even in the future. So that is the reason why they want to do that. But they should put more preparation for the potential risks when they are putting the offer, or they are going to bid with their counterparts. And maybe they were considering about investment with less amount of input. Well, it is also a kind of issue we need to think about. It's not about the money. It's also about technology, about the advancement, about the security. So when they are making the decisions, it's not just from the government mind. I think it's more like from the market point of views on what they can do. Maybe they still want to do more, but they are a little bit more cautious when they're seeing that something has happened before they made such a kind of offer or bidding.
Right. And William, what's your take? Do you think this will, to any extent, reduce U.S. image as a hospitable destination for investors? I know the U.S. has been the world's largest recipient of foreign direct investment for at least 12 consecutive years.
That's right. And I think the U.S. will maintain that kind of stance. And I think global investors, at least the ones that I've talked to in the recent days, view this case as an exception. As I said, it's bad timing and in some sense the wrong target for Nippon Steel. If they had combined with Nucor, I don't think we would have had this type of problem, because we wouldn't have had the union opposition and we would have had a modern company modernizing even more of a modern company. But the fact that it was the timed and treated as such a special case, I think most global investors will see it as a special case and still see that the United States opportunities for investment are really massive, both on the service sector side in terms of creating more service jobs and creating more production jobs. Now, manufacturing itself and the political objective of the United States is to try to secure more supply lines, to replicate supply lines so that we are not subject to just one source for critical materials like pharmaceuticals and chemicals and steel, is something that the U.S. is going to continue to do and create incentives for investors to regionalize trade in the United States, to come to Mexico and Canada and some of our allies, to relocate production that helps not only secure our supply chain, but also increase domestic employment in the United States. That really is the key. I think the Make America Great agenda comes down to just one basic thing: American jobs that are high paying and secure. Those are the ingredients for foreign investors, and I think most foreign investors recognize that. And this case is an exception to the rule.
Right. And last question to you all. What are the lessons of this case for Chinese companies investing in the U.S.? William, should I begin with you?
I think it shows how the China card is a very difficult one to play in the United States.
Right.
If I were a Chinese company, especially a large scale, with a large scale behind me, like a steel manufacturer, auto manufacturer, and wants to come to the U.S. market, it's going to have to do it in a very indirect way. In other words, the Japanese model, right? The Japanese model of saying, I'm not going to produce stuff and export it to the United States. I'm going to produce stuff with American manufacturers in the United States. I will bring my technology, I'll bring my capital, but I'm going to employ American workers and employ American managers to try to coordinate the production of Chinese labeled goods in the United States, the way Toyota did, the way Honda does. The secret to coming into America, especially under the Trump administration, is to say, I'm here to increase jobs. I'm here to increase high-paying jobs. And let me show you how I'm going to do it. Anybody who says, oh, I'm going to go produce in Mexico, stick a U.S. label on it, and then ship it into the United States, you're going to get killed. and same thing in for Europe, right? The Chinese strategy of using Belt and Road to create electric vehicle manufacturing in Eastern Europe in order to export into Western Europe is a strategy I think that's going to be doomed for failure.
All right. And Ed, your legal suggestion here?
You know, it's a bit of the same, except I would just, from a legal perspective, I mean, the Chinese have been kind of, in my own opinion, just watching it from the outside with investments in the United States, with electronic batteries, with automotive, with a whole bunch of different things. A lot of it gets ham-handed for whatever reason, and it isn't, for whatever reason, as smooth as the Japanese have been integrating. Because the Japanese certainly, and Mr. Trump used to allude to this even back in the 2016 election, he was mixing up Japan and China because that was sort of the mantra of the automotive industry, being protectionist against the Japanese. You don't have that any longer with the Japanese. They sort of integrated into the system. Chinese, in the deals that I've been a part of, they wind up trying to bring in as many Chinese workers on an EB-1C or an H-1B visa, on a intercompany visa exchange. So they're bringing in a lot of Chinese nationals to run this. That's not the way forward. What they need to do is integrate and sort of be invisible. I think when Legend took over the IBM mainframes business, that was sort of not a big issue at the time. And then they have to do the same in this particular instance, you know, if they want to be successful. And I think that China's geared up to try to, like was alluded to before, let's just open up in Mexico, let's open up in Canada, and let's get it underneath that treaty agreement. That's not going to work under the Trump administration. I think that there's bright lights at the end of this. It's not all doom and gloom. I think something like this is just a guess, but I think that TikTok isn't going to get destroyed under Mr. Trump. I think there was a moment of light where he saw that social media was important to his election, for an example. And I think he was the one who gave ZTE a pass, and you might see that here as well. So I think that we have to wait and see, but I also think that it is about making a deal. It is about making it economically viable, and that's what supposedly capitalism is all about. And I think China needs to take lessons from other countries who've come in and integrated as best they can. And China doesn't always appear to do it that way, and it's not necessarily their fault. They're kind of newer to the game, but that's something that can be learned from it. I also think that people will continue to use CFIUS, will continue to use a wide range of administrative actions to try to block things to do with China, which is unfair, but the world is super unfair. I know Mr. Trump has invited China's leader to go to the inauguration. Maybe that would be helpful. Mm-hmm. Some of this is legal, some of it's public relations, and some of it is political relationships between leaders of the country. So we'll have to see all in anticipation of what will happen.
Right. And last but not least, Dr. Zhou, what do you think the Chinese companies could do when they want to invest in the States, bending to Trump's request, even they are, like Ed just mentioned, unfair?
Actually, yeah, it is true that in my understanding that we can learn two things from this fear of investment. The first one is that we have to know more about the regulations in another country, in the host country, no matter the details and the procedures or consideration, like what kind of companies, what kind of sectors, what kind of the deals will be better or in details checked with by the administration. And we have to know more about the real elements, like from the labor side, from the local side, from the different sides, environment or other things. So that is very helpful for us to evaluate the cost or evaluate the possible risks that if we're going to put an investment there. And the second, I think that we can learn is that maybe there are some law or regulations say that the sensitive industries are some critical infrastructure or certain sectors, but when the times go on, it's changed. It will also extend it to the traditional sectors like the steel or other sectors. So we are making our potential investment. We should try to think it more carefully and not just think that only the high-tech industries are critical and sensitive.
And we look forward to seeing whether it's a mission impossible for Nippon Steel to acquire U.S. Steel in the coming months or years. With that, we wrap up this session of the Chat Lounge. Many thanks to Dr. Zhou Mi, Deputy Director, the Institute of American and Oceania Study, Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, Dr. Edward Lehman, founder and managing director of the China-based law firm Lehman, Lee & Chi, and William Li, chief economist, the U.S.-based Milken Institute, for sharing your expertise and insights. Show is available on all major podcast platforms. Please email us your comments at radio@cgtn.com. I'm Tuyun. Thank you for listening. We'll have more chat at the Chat Lounge in about a week.
I cannot marry you while your mother regards me.
Step into the world of timeless elegance with Mrs. Spring Fragrance, a captivating audiobook by Edith Eaton, read by Man Ling.
Because the green leaf still clings to the bough.
Experience the lively yet complex lives in Chinese American communities at the turn of the 20th century as Edith Eaton's delicate prose weaves together themes of tradition, change, love, and identity.
Forget all that belongs to the joy of life.
Follow the journey of Mrs. Spring Fragrance and witness the struggles and fights of those living on a rapidly changing exotic land while holding on to their cultural traditions, or more importantly, to their identities.
He could hardly believe that his daughter was seriously opposed to becoming the wife of such a good-looking, prosperous young merchant as Wang Ling.
Join Books and Beyond for Mrs. Spring Fragrance. Let the stories come to life in your imagination. Subscribe to Books and Beyond for free on your favorite podcast platforms or log on to radio.cgtn.com for more.
The best military commander is not he who fights 100 battles and wins every one of them. The best military strategy does not lead to the desiccation of the enemy's capital city. Decoding the Art of War will help you understand why there's no art in war and how Sun Tzu stayed undefeatable using the science of war, with fun stories and insightful breakdown of famous battles. Find Decoding the Art of War wherever you listen.